Well, thank you all for coming today. I think we have a little bit of good but sobering news to share with you from both the comptroller, state comptroller, Dean Appley's office, and from Moody's Investor Services. You saw in the press release I issued earlier that the comptroller has moved us off from the pretty close to the worst category for fiscal stress just a few years ago. We were just like half a percentage point shy of severe fiscal stress in 2017 based on the 2016 data. And then we moved a year or two later to moderate fiscal stress, again, just, or next lower category, just again missing moderate fiscal stress. And then finally we've been moved to the no stress category, which is great news. But perhaps most relevant is the Moody's Investor Service analysis, because that really affects our bond rating. As you all know, we're going to borrow about $6 million of bonds. We recently refinanced many millions of dollars of bonds. And our bond rating, and especially their outlook for the city, is highly influential in the interest rate we receive. And Moody's has improved our outlook at a time when just about every city across the country are having worsening outlooks. We've actually improved first from 2016 to negative outlook, to then 2017 we were to neutral outlook or stable outlook, and now we're a positive outlook, which is really, really good reinforcing. They did note a couple of things of concern, and I've left some literature for you. The things that can lead to an upgrade is obviously COVID-19 being completed and us getting back into this fiscal swing of things. We need to show we can continue the implementation of our financial recovery plan, which you've been viewing for the last few years, sustain the surpluses, develop some growth in our tax base, which is why projects like Prime are so important in these such things as our ratings. And we need to significantly reduce our long-term liabilities. When they talk about that, they're really talking about something called OPEB, other post-employment benefits. It's the health care that we provide for all of our retirees for life. And that the current value of that has gone down when I began from about $171 million liability, which represents all the property taxes paid in the city of Plattsburgh for another 17, 18 years, huge amount of money. Now it's down to 151 million, still a huge amount of money, but it's come down by 20 million. And the only way it really comes down, managing that liability, is trying to reduce the size of the city government footprint, because this is the obligation we have to retirees upon retirement. So they look at all the future retirees they expect. They do this 50-year analysis to come up with that number, and Moody's is very concerned about that. So the factors that could lead to a downgrade or a worsening of our outlook include failure to implement the financial recovery plan that we've begun over the last few years, inability to maintain structurally balanced financial operations, failure to reduce long-term liabilities, especially the very elevated OPEB liability, and any material decline in our tax base or the wealth and incomes of our residents. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on that or save some questions for just a few moments. I'd like to announce my budget, my revised budget for this year as well. We will be having our usual budget hearing on Thursday, October, what's the workout? 15th. For Thursday, October 15th at 2 p.m. That's an opportunity for the public to please come and address this budget, which will be on the website later on today. So this budget was really motivated by some of the concerns for Moody's and our expert financial analysts who look at the city's finances very closely. And they've asked us to really continue on this path of efficiency improvements, OPEB reductions, and also ensure that our citizens find the city to be affordable. So this is really an affordability budget. I wouldn't quite call it an austerity budget, although it builds upon the budget I produced a few months ago. At the request of the council, they asked me to go back and look at that based on new assumptions with regard to sales tax revenues, AIM revenues, etc. So I did that. At the same, my goal is to actually increase the level of services the city provides, but with moving and reallocating people from one area to another for the areas we like to really build up of roads and road repair, general maintenance of our city, etc. It corrects a number of errors that have caused past taxpayers to actually be subsidizing the ratepayers. The ratepayers are the people who purchase our water and sewer and refuse and MLD electricity accounts. They actually are obliged to pay for some of the costs of running government because the government also provides some administrative services to those units. And the amount of cost they've been reimbursing the general fund has actually been low. The Chamberlain recently admitted that by not including OPEB, retirees' liabilities, in these various sub-accounts, the ratepayers have not been paying their full share of the costs of running the city. So we're correcting that. We have a number of surplus properties that we need to start using the tools of a local development corporation to market so we can foster economic growth and expand our tax base. This budget is a balanced budget, as I've always produced, and maintains our healthy fund balance. But we continue to repair roads, provide all the public services you're accustomed to, and seeks more and additional public-private partnerships, as you've seen with regard to people interested in helping us with programs at the Crate Center, the Marina, etc. It further leverages our inexpensive green energy to lure more economic development, and hopefully this annexation will be a real spur to our property tax base and local job creation for the entire region. We use the dividends of these various savings to get our tax rate to what is commensurate with other North Country cities who pay typically less than $10 per mill rate. We're able to, because of our financial successes, lower the tax rate by approximately 15% to be in line with Watertown and Glens Falls. But it also challenges us to decide whether we're going to either maintain an increasingly unsustainable status quo, or whether, as Moody's and others suggest, we place ourselves on a path of fiscal sustainability and economic growth. You know, the city has gone through an awful lot over the past 20 years or so, since the closing of the bay, since the loss of $850,000 of revenue with the Falcon Seaboard agreement in 2009 or so. We had successive periods of deficits and tax raising, and our budgets were born more on wishful thinking rather than hardcore financial analysis. So we're left with a tax rate about 25% higher than some of our peer cities and 300% higher than other North Country cities. So we needed, and that culminated in a lower bond rating, as we discussed a moment ago, lower outlooks, worsening outlooks for the city, etc. And over that period, our roads weren't getting built and repaired properly. Speculative ventures, we were competing with speculative ventures with the private sector, and we're losing money, and our once healthy fund balance completely disappeared. So we've been trying to turn that around over the last few years with the help of the Common Council. Our fund balance is now within range. Our roads are being built. Our public safety is fully staffed and will continue to be fully staffed under this budget. We're running a second ambulance. Our taxes are now lower than my first budget and going to be significantly lower following this budget, and our fiscal stress has improved dramatically. So things were going very, very well, and then COVID-19 hit. Now, fortunately for the city, we very quickly regrouped, found more efficiencies, really preserved our fund balance as best we could, although it might take a little bit of a hit this year. And all the while, of course, we had a lot of people complaining that we shouldn't be taking these very prudent steps that other cities are taking. By the way, across the state, about 100,000 government jobs have been lost in New York State in the last few months. We'll find with this budget that actually we'll have the same number of jobs going forward, except for a few people that retired recently. So we're doing this through greater efficiencies, through better accounting, etc. But every other community is in the same boat. We're just starting a little bit earlier than many had, and doing it with a little bit more gusto, perhaps. But of course, any new budget is going to meet with a fair amount of resistance. We really need to hear from the taxpayers who are going to help or be helped by this. We're going to hear certainly from the tax-exempt properties that we're continuing to ask to pay at least their fair share on the rates for water, sewer, and electricity. But by doing so, we can maintain the level of services that you've all come to expect. You've heard a large outcry from public safety. This budget asks the public safety, or looks at the public safety officers who are eligible to retire over the next year. I calculate about 19 that are close to retirement or already eligible for retirement. If only about a third of those actually do retire, and we fully expect about a third will, then I pledged in this budget for that third, 6 or 7 officers to put 6 or 7 more people in the academy. But the city saves substantially by replacing high wage earners with starting wage earners. So that much of my savings comes from there. The Common Council demanded that we provide our residents with one-stop shopping for their bill paying, their licensing needs, and routine permits. I propose that we have just one front desk instead of currently 3 or more, where people can come in one-stop shop and get all the various needs met. But I also ask, and the council has asked, to do much more online. We put in online bill pay, automatic deductions from your bank accounts, etc. Not that many people have subscribed to this yet, but we hope that more will and create more efficiencies. And by the way, little or no fees to the customer. Automatic bill pay is completely free to customers and saves them the trip of coming in, saves them the stamp if they want to mail their bill in, etc. I think we can do better with regard to integrating our zoning and planning efforts. Right now, when somebody comes with a project, they may be going to a zoning committee, they may be going to a planning committee, they're sent to different offices. I'm uniting those offices all in one office to take care of the needs all again in this one-stop shopping kind of approach, so people won't be shunted from department to department in the bureaucracy, but can come to a one-stop that can help with all of their needs to try to improve their buildings, improve their homes, fulfill their entrepreneurial ideas for development, etc. And we need to rely more on our local development corporation that we recently formed. Our DRI, as you know, was supposed to take a year or 2, and now we're about 5 years into our DRI. We need to have assistance from the private sector to move these kinds of projects forward much more quickly and efficiently. At the same time, we were told and expected that the DRI would pay for the costs of some of this administration we put in place and expanded, knowing once the DRI was over, then we would contract that office once again. One of our workers was slated just to work for a couple of years for DRI, but since it's going for 4 or 5 years, and since we haven't actually been reimbursed as promised through the DRI, the city taxpayer has been ultimately paying what I calculate is close to $500,000 or $1 million of extra costs. So we need to really look at how we do this and get our community development office to focus, instead of DRI kinds of activities, focus on the $2 million fund we have for people to improve their businesses and improve their facades, etc. A fund that hasn't really even been touched over the last couple of years and should really be tapped in much more in the future by rearranging how that office does their business. My goal, obviously, is to be very much like the other cities in our region, offering the same level or better services, a professional fire department, a professional police force, a competitive tax rate, a beautiful environment, and the least expensive electricity anywhere. So I really believe all of this is within our grasp. You know, a lot of people lament back in the 1960s and 70s, and some of you have heard the story, that IBM and GE actually came to Plattsburgh to start operations. And Plattsburgh decided that, no, we were actually in love with the status quo. We really didn't need any more development. Let's send them to Burlington. So of course, GE and IBM both went to Burlington, and they've thrived ever since, and Burlington has thrived ever since as a consequence. We had the state plunk down $10 million for a downtown revitalization initiative, and then another developer would be willing to plunk down another $25 million to generate about 110 new households for our downtown. And again, it seems like our community's done whatever we could to spurn that generosity as well. Regardless of what you think of the merits of the project, we haven't been embracing of somehow adopting a new trajectory rather than the status quo that hasn't been working all that well. So I hope we can begin to embrace and celebrate these various opportunities. After all, this city is the only New York City within 100 miles, and it has a certain cultural responsibility to not only survive but also thrive for the good of the whole region. This budget shows we can maintain public safety, repair our roads, provide better services, and find greater efficiencies. We can at the same time improve our bond rating, maintain our fund balance, lower our fiscal stress score, and lower taxes. But we really need to start paying more attention to this OPEB, this other post-employment benefit. As I said, went down under the last few years from 172 million, actually I said 171 earlier, $172 million at the end of 2017 to 151 million now. We need to continue getting that OPEB down. It's an unconscionable drag on the city's future. And of course, where does that expense come from? It comes from providing services now, but providing those workers, providing those services, a lifetime benefit sometime in the future. So ultimately, we're consuming and enjoying the services now, and then we're asking you all, as renters or owners or young people, to come to the city and pay for the bills that we incurred in the past. So normally, if you're a private corporation, you have to put that money aside every year for your various post-employment benefits that you provide. The city has a pay-as-you-go system that simply asks future taxpayers to pay the cost of past services. And we have to stop doing that, and we have to start bringing that cost down, because it's not fair to ask future generations to pay for the costs of previous generations. You know, coming months will show whether we seize the opportunities or instead try to maintain unsustainable status quo and do our usual drowning in drama. By constructing this budget, by redressing imbalances that had our taxpayers subsidizing some of the largest industries and taxes and properties in our city, and by making the city more affordable and hence desirable for our senior citizens and new families alike, we finally have a unique opportunity to turn our beautiful but perennially financially distressed city around. I've worked with the council and department heads as hard as I could over the last 4 years to right our city's plight. As a last gesture, I leave our city with this very workable budget that maintains and expands our levels of services, secures our fund balance, lowers taxes to increase economic development. Now the council must decide which fork in the road to take. In the interest of future generations who pay this bill, I hope we can take the right road and find greater efficiencies. But time will tell. As the analysts who watch the city's finances stated recently, these reforms should be considered only a start. Our success will depend on our continuation along the path of increased efficiency, more public-private partnerships, tighter financial controls, assurance of the continuation of public services, and concern for the affordability and the pocketbooks of our taxpayers. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So the budget itself, it's made up of property taxes, sales tax, and then the water, the sewer, the electricity. Is that what actually forms the?
Yep. The one other big category in the revenue for the budget is AIM, aid and incentives to municipalities. That comes from the state. As a city, we're entitled to that. It's worth about $3 million. It's been going down because the state has reduced all their payments to municipalities by 20% of late. I don't anticipate in my budget it will pop back up to normal next year. But I'm assuming that by 2022, we'll start to get back, the economy will start getting back where it ought to be. A vaccine will be freely available. Our new normal will have fully embraced. We're getting back to work fully, et cetera. Unemployment rate will come down. So those assumptions of getting back to normal aren't part of this budget for the budget a year later that will occur for 2022. At that point, I do think some more revenue will resume both in sales tax and in AIM funding. So the budget has two components for the general fund, and then for all these enterprise funds like water and sewer and MLD. It has the revenue component, which you just asked about, then it has all the expenses components. And of course, the difference between the revenues and expenses is the budget surplus or deficit. So this runs a slight surplus, as I've always run. So it tends to add to the fund balance, our reserve account a little bit, our money in the bank just in case fund. And our money in the bank just in case fund is about right. Maybe it should be a little bit higher, but we're maintaining that fund balance relatively nicely after many years of a declining fund balance. So we're doing pretty well in that dimension as well.
And then another silly question, I apologize. The Moonies that you referenced in the first, is that like a state thing? Is that a federal thing? Is that a local thing?
Moody's, when we issue bonds, they have to be rated by an external ratings agency to let investors know whether this bond is good to invest in, and allows them to figure out basically what interest rate to offer the city. Since we're doing another big bond issue this year, and we always retire bonds and then reissue them, and we have more road projects, we borrow for part of that, et cetera. So we did a bond issue this year, refinance last year. So each time we do a refinance or bond issue, they have to redo their ratings. So they ask us to share with them our previous budgets, our accounts, our official external audits, et cetera. And then they do all their own research, and they just don't simply take our word for it. They have a whole team of 3 or 4 people on Wall Street that study, not full-time, but study the city of Plattsburgh. They read the newspapers, they see what initiatives, they see whether the DRI is succeeding or not. They see what kind of legal lawsuits we may be vulnerable for, et cetera. And then they provide a rating to our city for our bonds, and they also provide an outlook so people can better understand whether the city's on a better trend or a worsening trend. So a few years ago, we were on a worsening trend. We had a negative outlook. We turned that around to at least a neutral outlook or a stable outlook, and now we're probably one of the only cities anybody knows of that's actually in the COVID era moved to a positive outlook, because they say if only you keep doing the stuff you're doing, your bond rating is going to improve in the future. Most entities in the state are getting downgraded right now for obvious reasons. So Moody's does that for us every year. We put out a bond issue, and their report is available to you right here. The other one I referenced was the comptroller. They also do an analysis, sort of an audit of our finances. And you've probably heard comptroller audits school district and finds these concerns or these kinds of irregularities. We also are under that scrutiny as well. And they recently listed or released their audit for the city. And that's where they also noted that we moved from borderline severe fiscal stress to no designation, which is actually the best score. It means they don't have any concerns for us right now, as long as we continue to do the things that we are trying to do right now.
And is this stuff that every, I guess, city with a budget has to go through? Right.
The comptroller will issue their report, and every city that cooperates, they need data from the city. Some cities, for some reason, don't cooperate. Most do. So they'll issue their stress report every year in all the cities that cooperate. Moody's, since almost every city has to go and issue bonds once in a while, Moody's also rates all the cities, at least all the major cities.
And when did you say the public hearing was going to be, and have you done a public hearing before regarding?
Yeah, every time we release the budget, we do the same thing. We hold a press conference. We then put the budget on our website. We have a public hearing a week to 2 later, so we'll have ours Thursday, October 15th at 2 p.m. at City Hall, and that's where people can come and comment on the budget.
And when will Common Council be voting on the budget?
They won't. This is my budget. They can decide to instead do their own budget if they wish. They typically conduct their own set of hearings, and they typically do that in the fall. The deadline for me to produce a budget is October 8th of every year. So October 8th is coming up this week, hence producing the budget now. And then that gives the council an opportunity to decide whether they want to do their own budget instead of my budget. And then they have till, I think, January 12th or 14th or so to replace my budget with their budget if they wish. So they could do their own hearings as well.
Thank you.
Going forward, whether it be Mr. Beebe or Mr. Rosenquist that wins in November, are you confident that they'll be able to continue a lot of the same steps that have occurred over the last few years and keep the city going in the positive trajectory that you helped get it in?
You know, I'd be really assured if I heard from the candidates any discussion on actual finances and ideas. I mean, I hear they've got a lot of ideas, but I don't hear anything about the budget, about finances, about Moody's, about the stress score, about our level of taxes compared to other jurisdictions, about general affordability, about marketing our properties. You know, me as somebody who's very concerned about city finances, my ears are perked up for these sorts of statements. Instead, I hear them mostly, sometimes it seems like they're campaigning against me when they haven't figured out that I'm not even running for for re-election. So I'd be much assured if I heard more about these sorts of things we discussed today, but no, I'm not hearing almost anything about them. Now, to be fair, you know, this is my strength. You know, I teach finance, I'm an economist, I worry about this kind of stuff an awful lot, I think about this an awful lot. I've got the capability of producing a budget myself, a very complex process, so that may not be their skill set, but nonetheless, we need to have, Moody's has said, the comptroller said, we need to continue on doing more of this stuff. My fear is people could say, hey, he fixed the budget, so therefore we can start spending more and raise taxes and spend down the fund balance and, you know, be everything to everybody until the day of reckoning comes. But if we do that, if we go back to our old ways, if we don't continue looking for more ways to become more efficient, I can guarantee you, with all my experience with bond ratings agencies, et cetera, that our bond rating is going to plunge, our outlook is going to worsen. So this is serious stuff, and I hope that the mayoral candidates understand the seriousness of finances and don't use all the good work we've done the last few years to fall back to old patterns of behavior, which had less and less the taxpayers in mind, and more, it seems, special interests in mind. It's a good question.
Do you know how much, like, of a percentage that surplus is kind of like what you hope for? You know what I mean? It might not always be it there, but what's kind of like a really good
Surplus?
Yeah.
Well, you all do your own banking. And let's say you didn't have a medical plan. And you have to figure out just how much you should keep in the bank to, you know, if you're off from work a couple of weeks, if your transmission needs rebuilding, something like that, and knowing that you don't have a health care plan, I bet you'd say to yourself, geez, you know, I better have 1 or 2 months money in the bank just in case. Most financial advisors actually say 3 months just in case. That'd be 25% of your annual salary you should keep aside in a bank account, or something that can very easily be accessed. The city, when I took over, our fund balance had fallen to 0%. They had a goal of getting it between 3 and 5%, which would be equivalent to you having 2 weeks, one paycheck in the bank. But we're self-insured. Just like if you didn't have a medical plan, you'd be essentially self-insured. If you got ill, you pay the doctor. You run to the emergency ward, you pay the emergency, you write a check. We are self-insured, so the city's like that as well. So 2 to 3 months money in the bank, 15 to 25% fund balance is probably appropriate for a self-insured city. Right now, we're at about 10, 11%, maybe a little bit less, depending on how well this year goes. So I believe we're underfunded with regard to the fund balance. But somebody could come in as a new mayor and say, hey, look at that, there's $3 million just sitting there for me to go and spend and go on a spending spree. No, that money is there for the same reasons why you'd want a month or two of money in the bank just in case something happened to you. So the fund balance is exactly that purpose, to take into account the things that you couldn't have expected, like COVID. If we had a zero fund balance going into COVID, we'd be cooked. We'd be on the verge of insolvency. So you need a fund balance to take care of those unexpected things. And ours is not quite about right, but a lot better than what it was, and getting to where it probably ought to be if we can continue on looking for more innovative ways to make our government more efficient. Good question. Anything else?
Good.
Well, thanks very much for coming out, you folks.
Hey, Barry.
And the budget itself is like a 50-page document, as you know. I've got the Moody's stuff here, and of course the large document is going to be online later on today. We don't make copies just because we'd have to kill too many trees to do it.
Yeah, we'll probably just download the PDF.
Yeah, it'll be a PDF, yeah.
Excellent.
And not too big a PDF. 300K PDF.
Okay, perfect.
So did you have any questions for Councillor? I should have introduced Councillor Kelly here.
Sorry.
He's the chair of our finance committee.
I think you answered all the questions, Mr. Mayor.